The Friends of Forsyth, Edwin B. Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge and New Jersey Audubon welcome you to Gone Missing, 3 Billion Birds, an informative and hopefully lively discussion concerning the population decline of almost 3 billion birds in the US and Canada in the last 50 years. I'm Susan Puter. I'm a board member of the Friends of Forsyth. When the report, Decline in North American Avifauna, I've been practicing this too, was published in Science magazine last October, it made headlines in the national press, network news, social media, and we decided that there should be a way to further inform the public about the far-reaching implications that were behind the headlines. We thought that a panel of conservationists from our regions would be the best approach. A panel discussion would allow the science of the report to be explained in detail and would also provide a public forum for questions and answers. New Jersey holds a unique position in the East Coast. We are situated on the Atlantic Flyway. We're about halfway between the Arctic Circle and the equator, and as such, almost half the bird species that can be seen in the United States and Canada either pass through New Jersey on their migration routes north. They probably don't stay here because they've heard about our taxes. Or they reside and breed in the state. They range from waterfowl to seabirds, to shorebirds, to raptors, to songbirds, providing us with a wonderful diversity of species. We at Friends of Forsyth and New Jersey Audubon, they tell you don't do anything to your face when because of the virus, and what am I doing? Friends of Forsyth and New Jersey Audubon teamed up to invite some of the best conservationists in our region and an expert from Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology to help us understand the report and lead the panel that we're having. To think about almost 1/4 of the bird population in the US and Canada disappeared in the past 50 years, which is in some of ours lifetime, is hard to comprehend. So what does this hold for the future? Today we hope to provide some answers to questions dealing with what are contributing factors to the decline. Why some species and not others? What does this mean for the continued biodiversity in North America, here in New Jersey, and even the world, as migration patterns are global? Finally, what can be done to reverse this trend? To help us understand what brought us here today, Dr. Adrian Doctor from Cornell Lab of Ornithology and a co-author of the initial report in Science is here to begin our event with the decline of North American birds and what we can do about it. Briefly, Adrian Doctor is a Edward W. Rose postdoctoral fellow and a migration ecologist at the Cornell Lab. He received his master's degree from Leiden University and his PhD in physics from the University of Amsterdam. His research bridges the disciplines of physics, meteorology, computer science, and ecology, addressing questions on the effects of global change on the distribution and seasonal migration of birds. At Cornell Lab, he is currently studying the migration corridors of small songbirds at the scale of a full continent, a perspective that is still largely missing, but has come into reach through the use of meteorological weather radar networks in animal migration studies. He uses weather radar networks as well as individual tags to address questions in migration ecology, including when and where birds migrate, when and where birds die within the annual cycle, how shifting patterns in mortality and recruitment of young birds cause bird abundances to change. He also develops software tools for biologists using weather radar as a tool in their research. After his presentation, Eric Stiles, President and CEO of New Jersey Audubon, will take over as the moderator and introduce the other members of our esteemed panel. And that will begin our question and answer portion of the discussion. We want to thank you all for coming out here today. And now I'd like to introduce Adrian Doctor.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for showing up in such large numbers. I'm really happy to see so much interest in this topic of bird declines. What I will do in this talk is sort of give you a bit of the overview of what we found in this scientific paper, in our study, the attention that it garnered, and I'll talk a little bit also about maybe what can we do to reverse these trends of birds decline. Yeah, so I think it's like our love for birds. I think that's what brings us here together. And so I thought I start also with a picture of a beautiful bird. It's actually very nice to be back here in New Jersey. My first contact or my first experiences with birding and birds in the U.S. was actually here at Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge. I had and I was so amazed by these enormous numbers of shorebirds, and it's really cool to be back. I went out this morning, no shorebirds yet, but I think I'll come back in May. That was in 2003 when I was a student at Princeton University. But a long time has passed, and now I like the US so much that actually decided to stay. So now I'm a researcher at the Cornell lab in upstate New York, working on birds all the time. This bird is one of our biggest decliners, but of course if you think about bird declines, it's not something that drops from the sky, right? We've known for a very long time that birds and certain birds are having problems, and sort of that what really sparked this, I think, was for the older people. This is way before my time, but in the early 60s, this was a very influential book by Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. And she sort of described this pattern of that she saw birds disappearing from her yards, birds of prey in decline by the influences of DDT. And this was one of these first books that really, to a broad audience, made this point that things are changing and that birds are having problems. And this book was hugely influential, and it kind of turned around. There was a huge opposition also from the chemical industries that produced DDT. But she changed the minds of the public, and in the end, DDT was banned. Very much on the influence of this book also, and the inspiration of this book. And Rachel Carson was also very much influenced by Chandler Robbins. They influenced each other. He was the first person that sort of designed the first long-term monitoring program of birds in the U.S. He worked a long time with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So he got this idea, like, we have to sort of measure what's going on, because if we don't measure, we don't know we don't know what's changing. So he set up this program, the North American Breeding Bird Survey, where basically volunteers, people like maybe there's some BBS people here in the audience, that go every year. They go to the same points in the spring, listen how many birds they hear, and they do that every year in the same way. And if you do that long enough, you can start to see trends. And already in the 80s, people started to see these trends. So here's a figure that's actually from, I think it is from a report from the agency for 156 neotropical birds based on the BBS, the Breeding Bird Survey, a lot of red, a lot of declines of migratory birds. And people already started to notice in the 80s, like, things are changing. And it has continued. And we sort of started, I'm hitting now the wrong button, yeah. And once you start to see these declines, you also start to think we need sort of a broad-scale approach to bird conservation. We need to sort of inform people, and maybe also people that do management and in politics, what is going on. And a lot of these reports have, for example, been written over the years, like the state of Canada's birds, the state of North America's birds. They are sort of summaries of all the trends of birds that are often based off the BBS, of the Breeding Bird Survey, and that give you these trends of changes in bird numbers, like here. And you see there's a lot of up and down. Some species are going up, other groups of birds are going down. But one very basic question actually we did not have answers to, and that is the very simple question, like, we have so many increasing birds, we have declining birds. If we now add them all together, and if we see what has changed, have we now actually lost birds over the last decades or not? And that seems like such a simple question, but it is actually not, and it's actually quite a challenging thing to measure. And especially what is difficult is to, once it comes to absolute numbers of birds, how many birds are there in North America? It's not a very easy question to answer. I mean, you can go to your backyard and count birds every time, and maybe you see a decline of birds potentially, but then to know how many birds there are over the full continent, that is difficult. You need to take into account the detectability of birds. When I do, to what distance can I hear them? So once you go to these questions of absolute numbers of birds, things get very difficult. And that's also one of the reasons that people have never done that. And that's why actually we started to look into this question of, okay, net changes of birds changing. So the first thing that we did is to compile for all the North American birds all the best data sources that are there and all the best information that we could find. Very important is still the breeding bird survey, that for the majority of species, almost all the land birds, that's where our information comes from. A lot of information also comes from the Christmas bird count, so that happens in the winter, around Christmas time. And of course that's important for all these species that breed very far north, sort of that breed outside of southern Canada and the US. For those species, yeah, they're out of view during the breeding season, and that's why we have to use these winter counts. And then for several species also there's more specialized counts that are being done by professionals, for example with airplanes, surveys of geese colonies and that kind of things. So for each species we sort of figured out what's the best data source for the trends and for the population numbers. And that was actually a huge effort. And once we had that, we could start to combine all this information. So think then there's sort of two components for each species, and that is the trend, so the percentage change each year, which we get by revisiting sites every year and see how many birds we count. Another thing in components is like, what is the whole population size of that bird in North America, and get a good estimate for that. And that we had to do for each species. In total 529 species went into our analysis. And now comes the magic, like we have this statistical model, it's called a hierarchical Bayesian model. It is sort of a very important component because of course some species we know very well, the population size and the trend, and other species they are just much more difficult to detect and they have a large uncertainty. The statistical model is sort of there to account for all these different uncertainties and sort of add everything together. And then what it spits out is a change in numbers of birds since 1970 for all birds or for certain groups of birds. So that is where our main result then comes from, and that is now from 1970 till now, is this change in bird numbers. And actually we were surprised by it because we know that birds are changing, but there's a lot of variability, you know. It's not that all birds are declining. So we were actually very much surprised that actually if you add it all up, there's this huge loss of about 2.9 billion native birds that have been disappeared since 1970, only not even a lifetime of a human being. That means 29% of all North American birds, we estimate there's about 12 billion North American breeding birds. And about 300 out of these 529 species are in decline. So that is a bit of a sad story. So that's one component of our information. The other source of information that we had is a totally different technique, and this is the part actually that I led myself, where we use weather radars in the US to look at bird migration. So weather radars, they have a huge network in the US of these sensors. They are actually there to measure the weather, like hurricanes, precipitation, is what you see on the weather news every day. They also measure birds at night. Migratory birds. So migratory birds are migrating mostly at night, and what the radars detect is sort of, let me go back. Oh, it doesn't want to go back, but that's okay. Yeah, it's not that you see individual birds, it's more like you measure the biomass that's moving over our heads. It's sort of something like the amounts of meat in the sky. That's how you should think about it. And here we see this is only one night. Every 10 minutes we get this sort of estimate of bird meat in the sky and how it moves over our heads. And we can just start to add it together for a whole year. So then you sort of get this map of bird biomass moving through the skies. You see mostly in the east of the country, that's where we have most migration. And so all these 10-minute measurements that we do continuously, I did that for a whole year. And then you get some of an estimate of how many birds have moved over the US in that whole year, in the direction. And I can do that not only once, can go all the way back to like 2007, as well, where the time that I went back, and then see how this bird biomass in the skies has changed. So it doesn't depend on human observers at all. It's a totally independent way to look at bird changes. And if I analyze the trends for those, this is a little complicated figure, but red means declines in birds. Blue seems stations that indicate increases. And you see, especially in the east, there's a lot of red. And that means mostly we see declines of numbers of birds that these radars are measuring. To summarize it a little bit, you can combine the trend with the numbers of birds, just how we combine trends with population size estimates for the ground surveys, for the observations by humans, and then we get to a measure of loss of birds. And you see it's mostly in the east of the country where it's clear. You can break it down a little bit more. You see mostly in the Mississippi and the Atlantic flyways we see a decline. In the Pacific and the central flyways, there's not so much change that we can detect. So that means about 14% loss of migration since 2007. That's even steeper than what we see with the ground surveys, which might be weird because migratory birds are one of our more steeper decliners. An annual decline of 1% per year, 1.5%. That sounds small, but if you actually think about that, every year 1%, it really adds up over a large number of years. So we have these really two independent data sets, two totally independent methods that show the same thing, of this sort of net loss of birds. And that really helped to convince us and to convince the scientific communities that this is actually really happening. So there was a lot of biomass, all birds. Let's take it back a little bit to the birds that we love. And I'm going to do that slowly. I'm going to go step by step more and more towards species. But let's first break these results down now to a little bit larger groups. And that is what we call biomes, sort of ecological habitats and groups where birds are that we can categorize them according to that map that you see there. So we categorize each bird according to their wintering and summer, their breeding and wintering biome. And you see on the left the absolute loss of birds, so the number of birds in each group expressed as millions of birds lost since 1970. And on the right you have the relative loss, so that's the percentage that we have lost since relative to 1970. So for example, for the grasslands that's the gray line. That's our biggest loss in absolute terms and also in relative terms. So we lost about 720 million birds since 1970. In relative terms, it means about 53% loss since 1970. So that is really our major decliner. And it's something that is known very well also for many years, that grasslands birds have faced a lot of challenges and they're not doing well. The second biggest group is our boreal forests. About 500 million birds lost and a 33% decline. And basically, that's really a take-home message. It doesn't really matter how you slice it. Basically, any biome seems, and a lot of the families, there seems to be this sort of net change. And therefore, it's not something that happens to one thing. It's sort of a pervasive loss and a pervasive change that happens everywhere. Except maybe in wetlands. There's a net gain, and it's mostly driven by the increases that we see in ducks and geese. So not, for example, which I wanted to highlight here, especially with brigantine and forsyth. So closed shorebirds are actually, those are also water birds, but that's really a group that's also one of our steepest decliners. So about 70 million birds lost, a 37% decline. So if we then go a little finer, we go now to families. So here I've grouped it by bird families that have lost, have shown a net loss versus bird families that have shown a net gain since 1970. And these sort of wheels that you see, they are proportional. So you see there's 3.2 billion birds lost, families that have birds lost, relative to families that have gained. There's only 29 families, and their actual gain is actually much smaller. That pie chart is much smaller. Also, what we see here is that there's a couple of groups that really carry the majority of the loss, and that's sparrows, wood warblers, blackbirds, actually very common birds that you see a lot, very common families. The biggest gainers are vireos. Mysteriously, if anyone knows why vireos are actually doing so well, please come tell me. Because we really don't understand. They're a long-distance migrant. They winter in the Amazon. You would think they have all the challenges that any migratory bird would have, but somehow this group is doing pretty well. Ducks and geese doing well. Raptors also a good example of birds that are doing well. And now I'm going to jump on in our finest detail, and that is a couple of highlight species. So about 50% of the loss is actually made up by 10 species that are actually very abundant. So that is a really maybe surprising and important result. It's not, we as researchers and also conservationists, we have a bit of a tendency to focus on scarce birds and birds that are not doing so well and things that are rare. They are, yeah, that doesn't make sense, of course, that you are concerned about these birds, but one major thing that comes out of our study is that it's your common backyard birds, it's the trash birds that you see everywhere. Those are actually the ones that are declining. And for me, as someone from Europe, I found it, for example, striking that, for example, sparrows and starlings, you Americans don't like them as much, but I actually like them a lot. But I can understand why it's funny. Of course, they're an invasive species here. But these losses that we see here, they're one of our steepest decliners here too, in the US. But that mirrors the patterns that we also see in Europe. So once you start to lose your common birds and almost your sort of invasive species, it sort of shows that there's something fundamentally changing and something that's across the board. There's some sort of loss of quality in the habitat that even these sort of abundant birds have trouble to do as well as they did only 50 years ago. Also, of course, 1970 is only a random point that we took. That's where our data starts. That doesn't mean, of course, that what happens before that, of course, there has also probably decline has been going on for much longer. And yeah, you can only guess how things were really around 1900 or so. One thing that we do know is, like, this is a very good example actually how it was around 1900. This is the passenger pigeon, which you might know. And the estimates of this bird were that there were around 3 billion to maybe even 5 billion passenger pigeons once, around 1850 still. And that's about the size of birds, the amount of birds that we have lost now since the 1970s, also 3 billion birds. And it's I think, a striking reminder, like, what would it have been like that if we had all this monitoring data and that we would have known what was happening, then maybe this sort of decline of the passenger pigeon could have been stopped. So basically, in a period of only from 1870 to 1890, the bird was hunted so much, and there was also, of course, a lot of going on with logging, and that in that matter of time, it went from 3 billion birds to almost nothing. And in 1901, the last passenger pigeon was shot in the wild. The last bird died in 1914, I think, in a zoo. So it's a reminder, right? Like, species get rare. They sort of they decline before they go extinct. And like the passenger pigeon, we might not worry about our common birds now, but yeah, I think it is very important. And it's also a reminder of, like, birds. These declines of birds, so it's not just birds. I see them much more, this study, as an example of, like, biodiversity declines and losses that we see worldwide. Also, insects has been a lot of talk about. the birds are in that sense the little canary in the coal mine that reminds us of of the things that are going on. And yeah, it's questions that you have, like, are we losing this spectacle of mass migration? Can we hold that? The loss of that these birds play a role in the whole ecosystem and the food web. So if you lose your common birds, all these things start to change, and we don't really know or understand how. Oh no, wrong clicker. Yeah, so keep common birds common. It's the motto of Partners in Flight, the group of scientists and organizations that try to inform for policy. It has been their motto for a long time, and it makes sense. Keep common birds common. So what is causing all this? And then I have to say, this is not an explicit thing that we studied in this result. Our study was really describing this loss and the changes, and we do speculate in the paper, or speculate, of course we touch upon the causes. And although we didn't study this directly, it is clear, I think, from the scientific literature that by far what is driving this is sort of habitat loss and habitat degeneration that we see everywhere, and it's really the impact of humans. So intensification of the agriculture, where you used to have sort of diverse agriculture where you see insects and lots of different bird species. Some parts are just turning into sort of these blankets of green, where it's very productive and good for producing food, but ecologically it's very, very poor and almost the equivalent of a desert. Deforestation in the tropics is something that's going on. Urban sprawl that we see everywhere. These are really important things that we believe are really important in sort of, yeah, the generation of nature in general. And there's of course also the impact of direct human-caused mortality. And although maybe it's not the most important thing, it is very important, and it really adds up. It's all the different things. And of course this is important because this is something maybe that we have a more direct influence over and something we can do about. Like predation by cats, collisions by windows and structures. The numbers there are sort of the estimates of casualties each year that this takes in North America. So in the end it's like this complex variety and different things that are going on all at the same time. So habitat loss, pesticides, degeneration to fracking, like light at night, changes of storms and weather patterns. And of course it's a challenge really as a scientist, because everything is happening at the same time. And to really quantify now how does this impact bird declines is really something that is really, really difficult from a scientific point of view. And we know it's all important, but to really put the finger on, like, okay, this is maybe the most important thing, that is challenging. And it's especially challenging for birds, and especially migratory birds, because they don't stay in one place, right? Actually 80% or 70% of the birds in North America are actually migratory. And yeah, here's an example of the Baltimore Oriole. Based on eBird data, these dynamic maps. So yeah, they breed here in the sort of boreal and northern zones, or the forests, and they winter in this sort of small area in South America, and all the habitats in between they use during migration. So there's lots of things going on, and these birds, they experience that everywhere during the annual cycle. And that's why, for such a basic question for migratory birds, are they now having most problems in the winter, when they're in the south, in the tropics, or is it during the breeding season? And we don't really have a good answer to that yet. Maybe that's just the wrong posed question, and it's both important, but we don't know really where the bottlenecks are. So there's lots of, when it comes to causes, there's lots of opportunities and necessities to continue our research, because we know a lot, but we actually know a tremendous amount we don't know. Let's switch gears a little bit and to okay, well, what can we do about it, and are there any reasons for hope? Sometimes it's a little overwhelming and sort of out of our control. All these huge changes in the planet, so like it can be a little overwhelming, and to deal with that. And what can I do about it? but yeah, I'm an optimist maybe in that sense. And one thing that gives me hope is this enormous media attention that we got for this issue of bird declines. I mean, we know it was an important story, but we didn't expect this huge impact in the media. And it was like from conservative media outlets to liberal, it was all over the place, and everybody seemed to be generally interested and concerned about these findings. So I think that's also where it starts. If nobody cares about something, then nothing will ever change about it. So that's a hopeful thing that birds, people like birds, and people care about birds, and people care about the natural environment around them. This is a very important media outlet for us, because then you know that you really made an impact. That's when the Onion actually registers as a media outlet. This is Jarnold, the president of the new of Audubon. I don't have now the actual quote, but the bottom line of the paper was that he wanted to keep all these birds for himself, and this is his attic where he's feeding 30,000 ruby-throated hummingbirds and noted penguins and ostriches also there. Also, I think a hopeful thing is like conservation works, right? I mean, remember Silent Spring and the loss of almost all raptors, and like the bald eagle now is a very common bird, and you see it everywhere, and they really rebounded thanks to conservation efforts. Another very good example is that's the only group actually that's doing fine, the ducks and geese and the waterfowl, and a part of that is that yeah, and maybe you can take an example, like the hunting community, they really raised their voices and they cared about that in the 70s, and under their force of the hunters, I have to say it's very different in that in Europe, but the sort of network of wildlife refuges and the importance of that and the funding of that also comes through that, and we have to think about how we replicate such successes, and yeah, it worked, and the waterfowl in average are doing pretty well. What can we do? Because of course we need broad-scale action, and we need broad-scale protections for birds and policy changes. That's all there. But are there some simple things that everyone can do? And I do believe that any change also starts small. And yeah, we are already quite an economic force, actually. There was a study that we bring in as bird watchers, 41 billion annually. Look at this army of people right there. A challenge will be how you organize that also into some maybe, in the end, maybe a political force and in changes. And this girl, it's a picture that was during when our paper came out, and it was also in the time of the climate strikes. And I mean, it's hopeful maybe that in the younger generation, a lot of people it's no question anymore that people are concerned, and it's a broadly shared belief. And yeah, that's I think how change starts. We also came up with, I think I'll be very brief about this because I have only 2 minutes left. And it's also in the handout that you got, all these simple actions that you can take to make a change, and simple things that everybody can do and have a very clear impact for conservation. So please read that. There are 6. And the 7th I gave its own slide because as a scientist maybe it's an important one to me, and that's continue to watch birds, share what you see. It's so important, and it really makes an impact. A number, like the lab of ornithology, for example, eBird is an important thing where you can share your data. And for us as scientists, it's so important to get this enormous wealth of information about bird occurrences, and we haven't seen the last of that yet. I mean, the lab is now we're working on sort of declines very locally. There's so much that you can do with this data. So to go out to report what you see, I mean, that's really the basis of science of birds and birds that are everywhere. So please continue doing that on whatever platform or how you want to contribute. Yeah, also you can visit the site that we had developed for this site, which has all the information and where you can download the paper also and read it for yourself. And I think with this last cartoon that we got with Earth looking at the canary in its own coal mine, I want to open the floor and yeah, well, let's continue with the rest of the program. And thank you very much for your attention and for coming so jammers.
So I'm old enough to think he was a Stockton student. Thank you so much, Adrian, for the wonderful presentation. So now we get into like mixing it up a little bit for the panel discussion. I'm Eric Stiles, President and CEO of New Jersey Audubon, and I'm a Stockton alum. So, and in my remarks, I didn't think about this is where I became a birder at Forsyth. So I came here after dropping out of college a couple of times. My dad was a professor here, and Jerry Ligori was one of my best friends in college, and we started birding. We take our bikes, because we didn't have cars, and we lived off campus, and head down the road. So the important work that Friends of Forsyth and Forsyth do, you're to blame for where I am today. So I want to thank, again, Stockton University for hosting us, the event sponsors, the team of volunteers, and coming down from Ithaca here to the Flatlands for a very special occasion. And in addition to those, there is one member of the organizing committee that is comprised of the panelists and Sue Puder that will not be up here. How do I pronounce your last name? Puder? Puder. Which is Dale Rosselette. Dale is going to be our official timekeeper to keep us on track. So just before we jump in, I'm going to talk and introduce the panelists. There will be some guidelines and guardrails that I'm going to ask everyone to follow in the question and answer portion. So first, we have a sold-out crowd here today. So when we open it up, we're going to ask people to make questions, not statements, and keep them short and sweet so we can make sure everyone gets that turn at the mic. We also recognize that while panelists and the audience will be participating in constructive dialogue, offering many views, we have a strict rule about not discussing electioneering, endorsements, and political rancor, partisan rancor. I think we heard that this is a big tent. So what do I mean by this? So if we make statements that exclude people that share the passion for birds and for habitat and for birding, we are in essence sticking a knife in our own backs. So we're recognizing this is a big tent, and we want this to be a very inclusive and welcoming experience for everyone as we all strive towards recovery of birds and habitat in New Jersey and the United States. Specifically, if we want to be successful as a movement, we need that Muslim teacher that is wearing a burqa on the Great Falls in Patterson to the duck hunter on the Delaware Bay to succeed. So that's the big tent that we need to be mindful of and in order to succeed. So we will now be having the panelists come up. So come on up and we'll introduce ourselves one at a time. Again, we will be moving. We have a hard stop from the prepared questions to you, our audience, at 3:45. So Dale's going to help all of us keep on time and on track. We are very pleased to kind of have the rock star team from New Jersey and Cornell Lab here today as a special guest. We will start from I guess we're going to start left to right. So we're going to begin with Linda Widdop, who rescued New Jersey Audubon and our technology platform, but she's not here to talk about that. Yeah. Each panelist will give 2 minutes, and we'll jump right into the questions.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Linda Widdop. I am here today representing the Delaware Valley Ornithological Club. We're arguably the nation's oldest bird club, started in 1890. Having meetings at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia since then. And somewhere in the 80s, they actually let women in. So 90, almost 100 years later, they let women in. And I have the honor of being the president, the second female president of the club, after the very highly regarded Sandy Sherman took that helm in the 80s. At the Delaware, at DVOC, we just call ourselves DVOC because this thing is a mouthful. We're birders. We are just a bunch of birders that get together and talk about, you know, the things that we've seen and the trips that we've taken, and it's all really great until we find out that, you know, we're seeing less and less birds, and we're finding fewer and fewer birds out there. We've got some pretty new programs that I'll talk about hopefully later on. We do programs like we started a bird filly program to specifically include urban birders and just bird in the city limits of Philadelphia and try to get new people interested. We have a youth birding committee where we're attracting young birders and we're bringing them into the club as members and taking them out with us on field trips. And we also have two other initiatives. One of them is called New Bins for New Birders, where we actually provide binoculars to new birders. And we also pack backpacks for schools with birding things like field guides and binoculars and that kind of a thing. So we're out there, we're really trying to get a more diverse membership and get young people involved.
Shall I speak? Just take it away. I'm Virginia Reddig. I'm the refuge manager at Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge. I know many of you here, so welcome. I've been at the refuge for almost 10 years, if you can believe that, and certainly seen a lot of changes in that time. Specifically want to thank Friends of Forsyth, which is a really outstanding friends group for the refuge, for leading their effort to Sue's leadership to have this event, and certainly want to thank New Jersey Audubon for joining us. With the Friends of Forsyth at the refuge, we work a lot together on programs and projects. We have a lot going on, and I do want to point out that when you leave, and if you haven't gotten already, we have this beautiful color event, and we have events going on through June to get you to come back and to kind of take what you learned today and maybe keep building on that. So I wanted to share that at the front of the program, but other than that, just wanted to say that we want to thank you for coming out to the refuge and bird watching, but we know there's a lot more that you can do with what you know. We're going to talk about that today.
I'm Josh Gant from a park naturalist at Wells Mills County Park. I am the young people that they're getting involved, so that's me. I've been birding for a little while now, like 7 years, something like that, just a short amount of time. But it's had a major impact on me. And hearing information like this, you know, very, very dramatic information and drastic numbers that show total losses and things like that, it's kind of hard to swallow. It's definitely a hard pill to swallow. So, you know, I work as a naturalist. I do education at the park. So hopefully, you know, this panel will be able to help educate a little bit on, you know, give you some more information as to what's really going on. Cool.
Hi, my name is Adrian Doctor. I'm actually from Haarlem. The city is a small city near Amsterdam in the Netherlands, also called Holland. We speak Dutch. So I came here first to New Jersey in 2002. I was still a physicist then, but nowadays there's sort of this niche. There's all these big data and complicated data sets and analysis that get so data intensive that there's actually a niche for sort of very quantitative people like me that work in ecology. And I sort of, after my PhD, I sort of transitioned more and more into ecology and the study of birds. So the city where I grew up is in the dunes of the Netherlands. It's a major corridor of migration. So as a young kid, I was always bird watching and seeing migration. So that's really still my passion. And I work at the Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca. It's part of the Cornell University, but it's also a bit of it's like a weird mix between sort of a university research group and also an NGO. The mission of the lab is really to inform the general public and people around the world about birds, very science-based, bringing the best information to all of you, and also of course making more and more digital platforms where actually people like you and all of us can contribute data and be citizen scientists. So I think, I work a lot with weather radars to study migration in the sky, and also more and more with eBird data to look at individual birds. Yeah, I think I should keep it at that.
Hi, everybody. Emil DeVito, New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Conservation Foundation is 60 years old. We own and manage about 35 square miles of land in New Jersey. We were started by a housewife named Helen Fensky, saving the Great Swamp in Morris County when they wanted to build a jet port. And various successors have been fighting those battles ever since. As for myself, I started watching birds in about 1976. I started collecting lots of data on vegetation and birds in 1978 while a student at Rutgers. So I remember what it used to be like. In spite of how depressing it is to see what's happening, I remain hopeful because birds are many species of birds are incredibly resilient. The red knots have declined precipitously, in the last 30 or 40 years. And I think 25 years ago, when they were starting to reach rock bottom, we all thought that if it continued like that, for a few more years, they'd be gone. And that hasn't happened. Amazingly, they're still bouncing along the bottom and maybe bumping up a little bit. So, I think most people 25 years ago would have thought that we would have lost that battle. New Jersey Audubon especially worked very hard in that battle. But, it's a problem because there's so much science has been brought to bear on the red knot in the Arctic, here in New Jersey, in South America, and it still hasn't gotten the government agencies to align themselves and do what really needs to be done. So I'm very skeptical about research creating the right policies. It's often ignored. There are so many opposing factors, and so that's, I think, our biggest challenge.
Great. Well, good afternoon. My name is John Cecil. I work for New Jersey Audubon as the Vice President for Stewardship. And thank you to Sue and Friends of Forsyth, and to Eric for moderating, and to Stockton University for having us here today. It's great to be with you all, and such a great panel. Really great to hear all your backgrounds. At New Jersey Audubon, we're working to deploy a suite of conservation strategies to really try to lift up all of the habitats and landscapes that we have across the state, working on coast and tidal wetlands, on forests and farms and watersheds throughout the state, with a lot of emphasis on the Delaware watershed, and in the built environment, in our cities and towns, and really trying to get out and engage people where they are and get them exposed to nature and give them opportunities to build these relationships like I think probably so many of us in the audience and on the panel here today have had. Our stewardship work really spans the state. We have staff working throughout New Jersey to engage with all types of landowners, public, private, large landowners, small landowners, and help them make decisions about how to best manage the land and habitat that they have for birds and other wildlife. My background, I was exposed to birds and wildlife at probably a pretty young age. I have a vague memory of being exposed to hummingbird banding as a child. My uncle was a wildlife biologist, and so that had a huge influence on the trajectory of my life. I went and studied wildlife biology at Frostburg State University, and then went to the University of North Carolina at Wilmington to continue the pursuit of that degree. And before coming to New Jersey Audubon, I worked for the National Audubon Society for about a decade, running their important bird areas program. So this is definitely a deep passion of mine. I think we are faced with massive challenges, obviously, but there's a lot that we can all do. And I look forward to talking about that with you more and with the panel. So thank you all.
So again, we all want to thank and recognize Sue. She was both the architect, the visionary behind today, and the engine that could. So if you're going to thank one person for today's conference, Sue deserves that thanks. So now, all right, so we're going to jump right in. How many birders have an approach where they may have, think hunting is an anathema, right? What does waterfowl hunting have to do with bird conservation? And I think many in this room realize that we wouldn't have many of the magical places in New Jersey and throughout the country were it not for waterfowl hunters and biologists paving the way and really leading the space of what we need to achieve. So we're just going to jump right in. We heard from Adrian Doctor, and as a Catch-22 fan, Hank, I said I'm not going to call him Doctor, but I can't help myself. But we heard great stuff from Adrian about the success of the waterfowl. So we're going to aim this question at Virginia, taking a look at waterfowl as the kind of success model here, right? So there's the canary in the coal mine, and then there's the fireworks at the 4th of July.
What can we learn from this great story of waterfowl recovery in regards to the funding, the hard work, the habitat protection, and how do we apply that to all these other birds that we're hoping to recover and protect?
So waterfowl has been studied on a national level for decades. Governments, conservation organizations have worked together to develop actually continental population objectives. And this was started, probably over 50 years ago. But the mallard is probably the most studied bird in the world, and it's hunted. And so, the goal has always been to ensure that waterfowl are sustained, even though they're hunted. And that model doesn't necessarily work for all species. We're obviously not hunting little guys, but the interest was there, and we heard that in Adrian's talk a little bit. So it shows that if we have really good set of biological objectives, and we can get good data, it has to be well funded though, and so that's the key. So that waterfowl management, North American waterfowl management, has been hugely successful. And so about 20 years ago, certainly when I was just beginning my career, we were carrying those objectives over from the waterfowl world and applying them to non-game. That's when Partners in Flight was created and all these non-game groups came into play. And so, it's kind of a step down to here. A great example of where we do work together really closely is for piping plovers. We have a really great relationship with the state folks, with conservation organizations. Red Knot would be another good example that Emil mentioned. But the key to that, we're smart, right? We know things. We can direct efforts to habitat, like we saw with waterfowl and all the wetland habitat that we created over the decades. We can monitor the populations and we can adapt. But I really feel like the funding piece is the most critical piece of that equation. So some quick statistics. So all the way back in 1937, the Pittman-Robertson Act was created. And this was an excise tax. It's still in effect today. And it's on sporting firearms, archery, and handguns. Generally speaking, it's about an 11% tax that everybody pays forward to support programs. So a lot of this money goes to states, some of it for habitat work, some of it for hunter education programs, and shooting ranges, so things like that help support the sport of hunting. In 2019, states got over $1 billion. That's in 1 year from that excise tax, and that's from 11.5 million hunters that you would presume bought some stuff or traveled and kept scraps too. So that's $87 a hunter, and so that's your user pay system. So then currently, I don't know if folks have heard about how many folks have heard about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act? Very few, and that does not surprise me because I didn't even hear about it. But this is H.R. 3742. It is actually beginning to move through Congress. It jumped a hurdle in December. And this essentially is an act that would provide funding to do species recovery, invasive species work. It would do, provide for education. And it would also be a largely, funds going to state programs. We have over 50 wonderful fish and wildlife programs in states in the country. And the funding for that would actually come from energy and resource development on federal lands. And they estimate that would be about $1.3 billion a year. And that's already, what we're already doing on federal lands. And so that is, that's kind of what's out there right now is the only option to get funding to do some of the good work we're talking about. Duck stamp is obviously another one I'm sure everyone in here has heard about. It's $25 now. And 98 cents of every dollar goes towards buying land for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. So 85% of Forsyth Refuge is funded with duck stamp money. So our hunters, bought the land. Now that doesn't help us operate, it doesn't help us build boardwalks, it doesn't help us do anything, but it does at least acquire the land to do those protections. So I just kind of share all this to think about, we know how to organize around species recovery, we know how to do great habitat work. In fact, I consider this the most exciting time to be a part of wildlife management and wildlife conservation. I mean, look at what Adrian presented just a little while ago. Wasn't everyone just with their jaw dropped looking at those maps of migration move across the landscape and see it like that and living is incredible. We have these technical skills. We know more than we've ever known, even though there's a lot we don't still know. And we can get answers to questions that we weren't even daring to ask years ago. Like, we didn't even ask some of the questions that was presented in Adrian's work with the team that presented that paper. Now we can communicate that data and information at lightning speed across all these different types of backgrounds, conservationists, physicists, computer specialists. So, at my point, I'll just kind of leave it at let other folks chime into this topic, but I would argue that it's funding that is limiting our ability to do the best species recovery work that we can. And, now the stakes are super high. We have sea level rise, we have massive population expansion, and while some habitats like wetlands tend to be protected these days, there's still so many that aren't. And if you think about it, kind of bringing it back to our birding group here, of which I am. So we spend $6.3 billion a year on bird seed and feeders, period. $6.3 billion. So if you can imagine if there was an excise tax of just 5% on that would be $315 million a year that we could give to the states to do great work. And that would be, so say you go to, down to your feed store and you get a $16 bag of bird seed, it's 80 cents. And we know there was a movement to do this years ago in the 90s, and it failed largely because people didn't want to pay more money and a lot of the companies didn't want to charge extra fees. So that's kind of where I leave it on my point of view, is that we have lots of opportunity to do better.
All right. Thank you, Virginia.
Are the microphones working yet, just to ask? No? Okay.
Okay. So it's really interesting. With waterfowl, they have a business plan. The income is your return on that investment is habitat, duck populations, and public access. As Virginia said, the real juggernaut behind this is the money. So if we use this as a kind of a business model or plan, invite another panelist to take Virginia's excellent remarks and add to that.
Well, Eric, I'll jump in. I think it's important probably to break down a little bit further the approach that was taken with waterfowl to give you all a perspective of the muscle that's behind the waterfowl management planning framework. So to one key point, there's a real dedicated constituency, right? You've got duck hunters. They're heavily invested in the resource. They love to be out there on the landscape. They want to take ducks home with them. So, they're offering themselves up to be willing to contribute financially to the conservation of those birds, whether that's through the point that Virginia made about the duck stamp or contributing through the taxes that they're paying on weapons and ammunition and the associated stuff that you need to go hunt. But aside from that, there's a number of other things that happen. One, we passed a law to protect wetlands, so that helped as well. But then the unpacking piece that I referenced is the fact that waterfowl has largely been put into a numeric context. We know we have estimates about the populations of waterfowl. We've had them for probably 20 or 30 years at this point. The image that Adrian showed of the plane with all the biologists crowded around it, those are surveys that are conducted for waterfowl to document their populations and really measure them. So I think one key point here is being very specific and being quantitative. If you look outside of the conservation community, things that succeed well in the business world are those that you can measure, that you can put parameters around and document your performance. Waterfowl conservation has done that. We have made great strides, as Adrian has showed, in the ability to estimate songbird populations and really all bird populations to some degree at this point. But we've got to take that further in the sense that waterfowl did. They know that they have estimates on the number of birds. They also have regional coordinating mechanisms. They have flyway councils. All of the state agencies in each of the 4 flyways get together and think very deliberately about how they're going to manage those waterfowl populations every year. we're not necessarily that tightly coordinated around all of these other bird groups. We do have a framework. It's called the North American Bird Conservation Initiative. Curious, like tidbit fact that you probably aren't familiar with is that NABC, the North American Bird Conservation Initiative, grew out of NAFTA when the Clinton administration moved all that policy work forward back in the 90s. So we got this great mechanism to coordinate around bird conservation. And under NABC, there is the waterfowl program, but also a water bird conservation program, thinking about terns and long-legged egrets. There's a shorebird conservation initiative, and then there's Partners in Flight, which is celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. So I think in addition to public policy and just outright dollars, which we need both of those things there for, we need these mechanisms to really coordinate and measure and, is this even one? Hello?
That's for recording.
Oh, it's for recording. Okay, great.
So we need these mechanisms to come together as a community. There's lots of partners in this space. There are joint ventures which think about the habitat on the ground. They have science and technical committees. So I don't want to take all the time here, but there's a lot of structure behind the waterfowl management conservation approach that we've started to dabble with a little bit for some of these other bird groups, but we've got a lot more work to do.
Do we have time to add a couple of points? Virginia and John already mentioned this, but we, have nationwide laws to protect wetlands, freshwater wetlands, coastal wetlands in some cases. Some of them, New Jersey has really good ones. Other states, unfortunately, have to deal only with the federal laws, which are weaker. But the problem for some of these birds that are in steep decline, grassland birds, sparrows, some of the other groups that were mentioned, is that they're upland species, and we don't protect uplands, right? The only way to protect an upland is to buy it with public dollars. We can't, in New Jersey we protect uplands with the Pinelands Act and with the Highlands Act to some degree. But in much of the U.S. and Canada, uplands are fair game for development and conversion and agriculture and all these insidious things that take away habitat. So without a fundamental shift in the way we protect uplands, it's going to be a much tougher fight. And frankly, I don't know, in this climate that we're in for the last, probably since the late 80s was the last time we ever passed any real strong environmental legislation. So we've been in a probably almost 30 years of not being able to pass strong environmental regulations in this country, and that's going to have to shift. And that's going to take everybody, standing up and demanding some real changes in the way we go about doing business. And that's hemisphere wide, right? We're going to need a big shift.
You will need the community to come together under one big tent with a real kind of focus on private, public, nonprofit partnerships. We heard with waterfowl, we have great agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have wonderful land trusts like New Jersey Conservation Foundation. You have groups that are working with private and public landowners to put habitat on the ground like New Jersey Audubon. So we're looking at how do we create more birds, how do we create more habitat, and how do we create more public access. So those are the kind of the fundamental framework, if you will, and John added some nuance to this, to the recovery of waterfowl. So now we're going to jump into question 2, which is really getting into how we care for our land, whether it's a patio garden or someone that owns 20,000 acres in New Jersey. So in New Jersey, we have more than 1 million acres of land protected, more than the whole state of Texas. So we beat Texas on many ways, but New Jersey is at the leadership role among our great experiment called American democracy, where states can innovate. Yet despite this, we are seeing these losses. So the question we're going to ask, and John Cecil will start, is what can land managers in New Jersey do now to help reverse declining bird populations? And what does management look like?
Great, so thanks, Eric. So we've really done a great job, to Eric's point, in New Jersey. We've got one of the most successful farmland conservation programs in the country that's protected about 256,000 acres. Overall, we've protected about 1.37 million acres of land in New Jersey. That's almost 30% of the state. So we've got a lot of land protected. fantastic job. We're also the first state in the country that's going to reach complete build-out. And so by that, I mean that all the land will be accounted for. We'll either have a utilization for it in terms of a building or some purpose, like agriculture, or we will have protected that land. So we're also under substantial pressure. There are a variety of things that landowners can do. We work with a lot of large landowners, and we bring them to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We bring them to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We engage them with farm bill funding so they can do things on their property like manage their forests, protect their water resources, create habitat for wildlife, really all of those things, starting with the landowner's interests and objectives for why do they have land and why do they want to manage their land. But many of us don't own large properties and huge bits of land. Most of us have small plots of land, but that's not to say that you can't still make a significant contribution. So we need to reduce the amount of lawn that we have. We need to get rid of our invasive species. We need to plant more native plants. You should all go out and buy Doug Tallamy's newest book. He tells the story very well about what we're supposed to do in our yard, and we're going to get into this in a little more detail, but those are some really key things, and we can all play that role. Whether you have a quarter-acre lot or just a deck on your apartment, you can put up a hummingbird feeder. We can all do this. We can take our neighbors bird watching, we can talk to our communities, we can certify our yards as wildlife habitat with New Jersey Audubon and the National Wildlife Federation. We can certify our communities as wildlife habitat working together that way. So I think there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot of inspiration we can offer to our communities, to our neighbors, to our friends. But we've got to start talking to folks. We've got to make a little bit of a stink about this. We've got to kind of rise up and rally together like the waterfowl community has done and other interest groups have done around the country. So I will stop there and give the other panelists a chance to chime in here.
Somebody besides me.
There's definitely something to be said for management on the private scale. So a private, like a home ownership kind of management technique. One of the things to keep in mind is that obviously a major loss of birds could very well be due to a major loss of habitat, but it's not just like migration habitat or wintering or breeding, it's a combination, right? It's never just a single thing that really causes that downfall. But one of the ways we can help is, yes, we can put feeders up in our yard and things like that, but feeding the birds, they can find their own food in the wild. They did, before they had humans, they could find food anyway. So one of the things we can do is give them the possibility of more habitat for nesting and breeding spaces. One way to do that would be something like if you have a tree in your backyard where it's maybe dead and it's imposing, it could fall on your house and cause property damage, put up birdhouses. But don't make it species specific, like to one specific type of bird that you're looking for. Maybe make it a little bit more broad. So set up houses that could have multiple uses. So as long as there's maybe whatever native species happens, whether it's, I know one of the major focuses is bluebirds, but there's also tree swallows and chickadees and all these birds that use those cavity nesting habitats. So as long as there's a native bird in there, let it be, let it behave in its normal way, and put up some more breeding spaces for a lot of the birds that are losing those. You could do that on your own property.
Yeah, thanks. I'll jump in here. I don't know if is my mic on? Sorry, I'm pretty loud. Oh, there I am. Now I'm really loud. Sorry. So I talked a little bit about the bird club that I belong to, which is the DVOC. But there's many other, every place in America now has bird clubs. And I would encourage you to, if you're not a member of a bird club, if you haven't joined the Audubon Society, whatever Audubon Society is closest to you, please do that for a couple of reasons. Number one is stop. I just started. He's 25. He got like 4 minutes. That's age discrimination. Ages. Okay, I'll talk about it later.
All right, so now, is this one on? All right, there we go. So we've heard about what we can do as individuals, and the next question is about what we can do as a movement or collectively. So there's very important things. There's what to do lists that will be, Sue reminded me, I'll remind you again, there's great information as you walk out on those tables, things that you can do right as you leave here
in your own places and spaces. But this is for Virginia, really talking about the broader role of activism and advocacy, in some ways changing the rules of the game, and how can we individually and then collectively have the types of impacts we need to see.
All right, so I put together some more facts and figures for us. So did you know that we have 48 million acres of lawn in the United States? Isn't that wonderful? And kind of speaking to John's point about complete build out, we have 20% of New Jersey is lawn. And I always kind of chuckle when I hear people talk about, oh, those Canada geese, they're in the way. It's like, well, then stop cutting your grass. They won't come back, right? All these big corporations and, North Jersey, where all the big corporations are, that have all these beautiful lawns in front of their buildings, but there's geese all over. They're doing a great job increasing the resident Canada goose population. But along with all that grass growing, monoculture is the 9 billion gallons of water that Americans use every day to water their lawns. And it has zero value to wildlife. So obviously, anyone can make a change and make a difference. And in fact, we're going to give you all a packet of native seeds to take home with directions on what you can do and get those at the door on the way out. But speaking a little bit more broadly to what we can all do together, I certainly can't. And so we're in South Jersey, right? So I can talk about what we can do here. You all have to be engaged with Pat Sutton's website and all the things she is telling us to do. The resources we have made available to us, the native plants we have, the workshops that we have here, you really don't have an excuse to not do something in your yard. And even if it's having a potted plant with some native species or something that'll attract a hummingbird, we all have a really, really, really negative impact on the environment, period. I do. And so I do feel that we all are obligated. And then you have to take it a step further, though, to speak to Eric's point, which is, are you telling anybody about it? Are you telling anybody about why they can make a difference and how small? You all have the capacity to educate. And so I would just say that is the thing. It is really on us.
Okay, so just to continue this theme, you've heard about things like Recovering America's Wildlife Act, the federal legislation. New Jersey Audubon works with great groups like New Jersey Conservation Foundation on this. So if any of you are interested in supporting efforts in New Jersey to get our federal delegates, and we have bipartisan support, it's not a partisan issue, please come up to me afterwards and I will get your contact information, and New Jersey Conservation Foundation, New Jersey Audubon will gladly welcome you. And if you want to go, how many people have lobbied down in DC and met their congressman or congresswoman? It's actually, it's great. The first time I did it, you feel the power of the difference that we can make. So if you're interested in getting involved with the lobbying and advocacy, again, chat with Emil DeVito from New Jersey Conservation Foundation, John Cecil, myself, or Dale following. So,
are we still on the advocacy thing, or are we going to the next thing?
Dale held up the stop sign. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. I apologize. So yes, jump in.
So
I should have stopped.
There's a bill in the state legislature right now about trying to reduce the use of neonicotinoids, and I know that New Jersey League of Conservation Voters and Natural Resource Defense Council, and I'm pretty sure New Jersey Audubon are the main players in that bill. And certainly many of the other nonprofits are going to support that bill, but we need your help. Because when that bill is, up for review in Trenton, we're going to need a lot of people at those committee meetings. The bill is a start. These chemicals are banned in many places in Europe, the neonicotinoids. They're killing pollinators, and I think the lack of insects is one of the primary reasons of this collapse. The food web is not what it used to be, and in many habitats. And So this bill is a start. It exempts agriculture, which, that's a huge lift. The agricultural lobby is one of the most powerful lobbies in New Jersey, and they're not about to stop using Roundup-ready crops and neonicotinoid-coated seeds, and it's going to take an enormous effort to get this chemical banned. But at least this is a start. It'll be banned from, what you can buy in the store to spray around your yard, and maybe even what people who take care of lawns are doing. That might be difficult too, but we can try. So that's, that's a huge example of one bill that can make an enormous difference. When New Jersey Audubon briefed my colleagues on this, we found out that there was a study in Bergen County, which doesn't have any agriculture, hardly. And it's all from lawns. Almost every single stream in Bergen County had neonicotinoids at high levels in the water, which is destroying the insect food chain in the wetlands, which is, very important to many species of birds.
All right, anyone else want to jump in 30 seconds before we move to the next question?
Well, there are just a couple other policy pieces that are moving at the state and federal level to be aware of. So you heard about Recovering America's Wildlife Act. There's also an effort underway to permanently fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which contributes dollars to the protection of so many lands. At the state level, there's a plastic bag bill ban that's working its way through the state legislature, so I would say get behind that one. And then we all need to reach out and ask for more protections for migratory birds and to ensure the National Environmental Policy Act stays intact and whole.
Great, thank you so much. So the next question to Dr. DeVito, the taller, much more handsome son of Danny DeVito. I met Emil when I was...
His DNA has not come up on Ancestry.com yet as being anything related to me.
So when I came out of Stockton, Emil was one of my mentors welcoming me to the conservation movement of New Jersey. So, and Emil also has a PhD. So he's kind of this, both this academic and warrior. In this space, Emil, what is the next step for this research to inform the work that we're doing in conservation?
Well, this is really difficult. There are so many instances, I mentioned this earlier, where we have done research. I mean, New Jersey, for example, with the red knot, has spent a fortune. The Shorebird Fund, funding the Endangered Species Program to research every last aspect of red knot biology, and yet we still can't get over the hump with all that scientific data and information, and people still question it. So sometimes I wonder just, how much research is, at some point, nobody's listening, when it comes to actually getting agencies, governments, legislators to actually do something. On the other hand, what you saw today was amazing, right? There might be ways to tease out certain things. For example, red-winged blackbirds were up on the screen at one point. And you see red-winged blackbirds all over the place. They seem to be in every little patch of wetland. The detention basin on the side of every McDonald's has a couple of red-winged blackbirds. What we don't know is how well are the females doing? Are they, why is the population declining? Are the females having smaller eggs, smaller young, the young aren't gaining weight? Is it a food web kind of thing? Perhaps, with all the chemicals. The females winter further south than the males. Maybe they rely more heavily on some of the agricultural lands in the southern tier that are, hugely, intensively turned over to industrial agriculture and lots of chemicals. It's a very difficult kind of question to answer. But the question is, even if we knew those answers, would it make a difference? Would somebody listen? That's what I really worry about. And then there was another bird on the screen, vireos. I have my pet theory about vireos, you said. So I've only been to the tropics a few times in the winter, but white-eyed vireos, for example, absolutely love the live fence posts of cattle pastures. They have certain fruits that the white-eyed vireos defend. And so the white-eyed vireos, turning over to cattle pastures in Central America, white-eyed vireos love it. So red-eyed vireos, you see them in every large canopy tree behind every little, coffee shop on the highways in Central America. Every big tree that's in the backyard is filled with vireos. They seem to tolerate the fragmented forest in Central America in the wintertime. Also, they're pretty much canopy specialists, and so here in the Northeast, where the deer have devastated the understory, and there's the food web and the herbaceous plants are taken over by invasive species, the canopy has yet to be affected too much because those older trees are still there. So it could be that their key habitat components are not being affected as much as some of the other long-distance migrants. But again, that would take an enormous amount of research to pin down the answer, and I don't know that we need to know that answer. We know that the birds are declining and somebody has to do something about it.
All right, thank you so much. And next question will be for Josh. Is there a unique role for birders, for all of us in the room, to engage in conservation?
That's a great question.
Probably because you wrote it.
I did not. So coming from the birding perspective, public perspective, there's a lot of subscription-based services that you can get involved with. Things like National Audubon Society, obviously, the American Bird Conservancy, the American Birding Association. There's more. There's so many, the DVOC, all these places. And they'll have information as to, they'll have at least better information to know where to put the funds and where they're needed, rather than just, you try to maybe give them the fundings, and they can figure that out, because they do the research, they have the knowledge, they have the know-how, they have the staff that keep up to date on the problems and the possible solutions. What can birders do on a personal level? So when I walk outside and I'm just looking for birds, I'm seeing habitat, I'm seeing changes. But one thing definitely that any person can do, but birders would be outside doing this, educate yourselves on the issues that the birds are facing. We talked a lot about those issues earlier, habitat loss, windows, like window strike deaths cause a lot of that, light pollution, especially during migration. There's a lot of things that the best thing to do is just be knowledgeable about it, get information about it, understand it. And one of the things that's kind of overlooked is we see these big problems, but we don't always understand the ecology of what's going on. But when you do get bogged down, or maybe a little down, saddened by looking at all these facts and figures of light pollution and damage and things like that, look at the success stories to pick yourself back up, like the waterfowl and cliff swallows that are nesting under bridges. Their populations are doing great. But look at the facts and the data. Educate yourself on the science and what's being done. Learn about the ecological importance. There's all kinds of management techniques that we use, and just understand it. Be open to understanding all types of ecological management tools.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is. We get 2 minutes. Well, I know, but I'm trying to make up for some of us that went over, so we can meet the 3:45 and let the audience answer.
Okay.
If you don't mind, just moderator's prerogative. I just want to give the audience plenty of time. So the next question is for Linda. Nature deficit. What do we do? So taking a look at this space, again, how many of folks have read many articles similar to 3 billion birds? Adults, and especially children, are spending less time outside today than ever, right? So we've all heard this. We know children that spend less time outside have severe physical health issues, mental health issues, academic performance goes down, and they are therefore disconnected in conservation. We as adults suffer this as well, the vitamin N deficiency or nature deficiency. So this one to Linda is, what can we do to reverse this?
Well, the funny thing is when you wrote somebody wrote the question, they wrote something, what role does outdoor education, environmental outreach, and unstructured time outdoors play? And I'm like, unstructured time outdoors, kids don't have unstructured time anywhere anymore, right? So it's not even like when we were kids, I don't know about you, but my mom kicked me out of the house at 3:30 in the afternoon and said, don't come back until it's dark. And we found something to do, right? And we had fun doing that. Today's kids don't do that. Everything is structured. They won't even stand at the bus stop corner by themselves. They're sitting in the car, in the bus, waiting for the bus. So they don't get a chance to even see anything out of doors. They get out of the car, into the bus, into the school, into the after-school activity, and then back home. They're not outdoors. So how can we? And then what are all they're doing is this now, right? On the phone or on the Game Boys. So we've got to come up with ways to figure out how to engage those young people and use the tools that they're in. And I'll tell you, two of the biggest things that I've seen work in my personal life and at the club is iNaturalist. iNaturalist is like the best thing to get kids involved in, because iNaturalist is an app on your phone that you can take a picture of anything that's living. It can be a bug, it can be a plant, it can be a bird, it can be your dog, whatever. Take a picture of it, and then iNaturalist will try to figure out what it is for you. And it's great for kids because you can do that at their level, right? So my nephews and nieces are crawling around outside in their yard, taking a picture of every clover, every whatever, and this is just getting them involved and engaged. And the other one, of course, is eBird, which we've talked about 100 times tonight. But so those two things, because they're apps on the phone, I think allow children and young people to be engaged in nature a lot more than they would, because they don't get to go outside anymore.
Great. Other panelists?
I'd just say pick this up and bring them to the refuge.
Coming from that younger generation that is on their phones a lot, it's very true. But eBird is one of my mainstays. Like, I use it every day, twice a day. It's like I use it a lot. But yeah, it's definitely something that gets the younger generation involved, and I feel like that's a very important. It's very important for birding to continue, for this level of what we do to continue. We want to make sure that habitats remain safe, and that people get outside, and that's one thing, especially with the younger kids need to get outside, need to be educated on what we're fighting for, what we're trying to do. And I think that phone apps are definitely a way to get to a younger audience. And I mean, it's nice that, because I deal with a lot of people who are young kids and old kids. You know what I mean? Older generations and younger generations. And I get to teach older people and younger people how to use eBird. And I'll tell you what, everybody picks it up pretty quickly. It's not a hard thing to use. It's not a hard thing to learn. And I think it really does help. I think Adrian might be able to talk a little bit about how helpful it can be, actually. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. So yeah, I think eBird it's a very helpful tool, and so is Merlin, for example. It also helps you ID birds, and I think that is a very powerful thing. That's something I experience always. That like once you recognize something, once you know how to identify something, then you start to see it, and it's this sort of. Therefore, I think it's also so important to start with kids at a very young age and expose them to nature and seeing these things, because once you know what the blue jay is, then you start to see the blue jays everywhere, and once you don't know, you don't even notice them, and I think it's so important to be sort of, if you don't care about birds, or if you don't have some personal connection to it, then I think these changes in conservation policies will also be much more difficult. I strongly believe in that it comes from something that we value and that we think is important, and it's therefore so important that people value their outside time and learn to appreciate nature. And I don't have a clear-cut answer how to do that, but I guess as parents, to bring your kids to the outsides and get them exposed to it, even. That's also why these events are so important. And I've seen, for example, I've done a lot of banding at a banding station in the Netherlands. And we had a couple of times a year, there were these events where we took young kids and just let them hold this bird in their hand and see them up close. And you could see the fascination. These were kids that had maybe no exposure to it, but then there's this immediate fascination for that little bird and to see it up close. And I think those little things can make a big difference. Maybe those will be the next birders and conservation. And so I have to stop.
All right. Take a pause because this question's coming right back at you. So University of Michigan researchers analyzed a data set for migrating birds over 40 years. So it's roughly the same time period as a 3 billion bird loss, which shows that bodies are getting smaller while they're, unlike me, but while their wings are getting longer, bigger. So as the climate warms, birds might shrink because their body temperatures require less body fat, right? The Michigan research took a look at the Field Museum data suggesting that these birds have grown longer wings as a compensation. Can you explain this better than I can, and what are your thoughts about this?
It's a fascinating study. So basically these researchers, they looked, I think, to birds that collide with buildings, and then you have all these, you have a whole collection of dead birds, and they did that over many, many years, and they saw that they were shrinking and getting smaller. There's this well-known relationship, it's called Bergmann's rule in ecology, like that when you get in cooler climates, then typically of the same species of animals, they tend to be bigger, and if you go more to warmer climates, they tend to be smaller. Now it's getting warmer, and there's also experiments that show that if you grow birds in a little bit warmer temperatures, they tend to be smaller. To be honest, I don't think that we fully understand why that now exactly is happening, but I see that study also more as another response to changes that we see everywhere, in this case climate. I don't know exactly why the birds are getting smaller, but it is a potential adaptation, and we see that everywhere, these kind of changes. So birds start to migrate earlier, certain birds stop migrating, certain subpopulations, birds start to take different routes, and there's all these adaptations and changes to the changing environments, and it shows a huge, I think, resilience of birds and how birds can adapt. And we see that happening everywhere, and we'll have to see whether this body shrinkage, is that really an adaptation to something? Is there a benefit, or is that sort of something that just happens? That's also a possibility. At least I think for me it's a good reminder of how much everything is in flux, and how terrible this is with the changing climate and all the changes. It's also, from a scientist, almost like an interesting and terrible experiment, right? It's the first time where someone turned up the knob in a fixed direction, and now we're going to see what's happening. So it's an interesting scientific experiment, how terrible it also is. But we learn a lot from it all the time.
Great. Thank you. And now is when we're going to open up the barn doors and the floodgates and go to the audience. Quick reminder, we talked about the guidelines and guardrails at the beginning. We asked for questions to the panelists. And we're going to begin with two students from our gracious host here at Stockton University to begin this, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So, no, you don't have to time. Thank you, Dale, for doing that.
While they're doing that, I'll just say that the Stockton Environmental Club is helping us with the mics today, so we really appreciate that and glad to see the students involved in this event.
So go ahead. Why don't we'll just share my mic. So we're going to have
1, 2.
Oh.
Great. Oh.
Okay, welcome. Thank you for all being here today. Very much appreciated. I'm Ryan Brewster. I'm part of the Stockton Environmental Club, and I am a current senior here at Stockton. So my question for you today is, could the loss of the bird biodiversity throughout the nation lead to other environmental disasters, such as unrestricted bug population increases?
Maybe
I'll go next if you start. You want me to start?
Yeah, you can talk to Laurie a lot.
So that's an incredibly complex question. You know, we've seen an incredible die-off of bats, right? 99% of the most common bat in this part of the world is gone, the little brown bats. Many of the other species of bats have nosedived. A couple of species have increased, like big brown bat, and we're starting to see more bats again in the summertime. I don't know that anybody was measuring how many biting insects there were, you know, in the early evening while this was going on. I didn't notice anything. There's tremendous resilience in biological systems. If one thing falls out, something else takes up the slack. We don't even know, frankly, I don't think birds control insect populations. I don't even think bats control insect populations. I think those populations are controlled by the dragonfly larvae in the wetlands where the larval stages of those insects are. These are incredibly complex questions. I think birds and bats are just skimming the cream off the top. As soon as, you see chimney swifts foraging, they're like baleen whales, right? They just fly with their mouths open, and they have to find a patch of gnats. That's what they have to do. As soon as the number of gnats in a patch isn't that great, they leave and they go find another patch. They're not really going to really impact that population very much, because if the population is low, they're not even going to be there. They're just skimming the cream off the top. I think that's a kind of a common misconception that these aerial predators are controlling things. I really doubt that that's the case. I don't know that there are any good numbers on that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I'll just add something to that. Remember when, you used to drive around in the 60s, and well, I don't remember the 60s, but I remember the 70s. And even the early part of the 80s at night, and your windshield on your car would be disgusting. It would be just a mat of bug death. How much do you see that anymore? Maybe now you get one, couple, 2 or 3 on your, I get 2 or 3 on my drive from Forsyth down to Cape May, and I'm like, oh, gee, that stinks. Well, it used to be like constant every night. So I think we've already passed the tipping point on insects, quite frankly. Yeah. And I think that's a really good marker of it.
How many of you used to run behind the bug spray thing? So just ride your bikes through it, right? Yeah, and amazingly, we're still alive. I don't know how it happens, right? But from what I've learned at the presentations that I've attended, this type of presentation, it's the opposite, right? It's the declining bug population is affecting the bird population, because the same thing that you were saying. It's no bugs, no birds, because there's no food, right? So, I would probably be dead today if they shut down all the McDonald's. I'm just saying.
There's probably the best moth person in New Jersey, Dale Schweitzer. I don't know, is he here today by any chance? No, he's from South Jersey. He describes he would lay on his back at night and watch the moths emerge from the trees, as it got dark. And he just, it's orders of magnitude fewer, moths flying out of the trees, going around, trying to find mates and that kind of thing as it gets dark. The food web has been totally altered by various insidious factors, and that's the heart, probably, of this problem that we're seeing for many of the species of birds, the insectivores especially. So, it's not so much that birds are controlling insects, it's insects are controlling birds.
All right, the second question from Stockton.
Hi, I'm Ben Jobek. I'm the president of the Environmental Club here. So I'd like to just quickly say on the sort of like the question of young birders and whatnot, birders are environmentalists, and how do we get more of them? You reach out to organizations like us, because we work to get Stockton involved in all of these programs, like bringing plastic proposals to our campus, to just reaching out to the mediums that our generation uses, like Instagram and whatnot, just easily connecting to people. And we could see we had our big student senate meeting last week. We filled up the room with all the environmentalists. So we're out there, and there just needs to be a way to better connect with us. But one of the questions one of our members asked was, should we modify an environment to better suit the needs of another species that are in greater decline?
Well, I'll jump on that one because it's right in the wheelhouse. So we think a lot, often, all the time about land management and what we're managing the land for. A lot of that's driven by the person that owns the land, whether we like it or not. They own the land, they control the decisions that are made on it. So you got to meet those folks where they are. Often we start from the premise of, what do you want then? What do you want on your land? Do you want to see more birds? Do you want to manage your property in a certain way? And I do think that the decisions that we make are grounded in that initial question. We can manage habitat and recover species. We've done that in the past. We can do it in a very deliberate way. We have to manage it and plan for it and manage it and adapt and monitor and use that whole adaptive management framework to ensure that we're having the impact that we want to have. But the critical question is the one that you asked, which is what do we want to manage the land for? Certainly bound to some degree by what we know about those species and how much we can tinker with the things that we know directly affect them. So that's absolutely a factor in the management decisions that we're making and the actions that we're taking, and then the study that we do to adapt the process and move forward. But for a long time, we thought about conservation as restoring to a point in the past, as to try to go backwards and recover what was lost based on some prior point in time. And the studies and data really kind of get us thinking in that way. But I would argue that we're out of that space. We're no longer at a place where we can go backwards in time. We have to decide what things do we want to keep and how are we going to keep them, and then work like crazy to keep them there and try to grow a few more of them.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. So as bad as it is, wildlife management is all about winners and losers. So we make choices as human beings to manage for certain things, but that's based on a lot of what we've been learning the last 20 or so years. We manage for piping plovers because we know that they're in such a decline. So, but are we managing for some of the species that we see in the study with the 3 billion birds lost? I would say no. And that's something, why this information is so helpful, because it allows us to help make our management objectives and to think about, well, maybe we should be doing a little bit more for things that are, I don't know, will we start managing for red-winged blackbirds? I mean, there's who knows, right? So I agree that with John, that we are always looking forward, and there's definitely, we take what we know from the past, but we have to be thinking about what the new future is. And it's really triage. We're in a triage state. We're really focusing on certain things, and we're letting other things just go by the wayside. And that's what we have to do when we make those choices.
So all right, we're gonna jump right into next question because we gotta keep this rolling. So the two gentlemen, we have one person that indicated, the woman right here, glasses. We're gonna pass the mic around. So just time out. Give us one second. We'll be right there.
Do wind turbines affect the bird population?
I don't know. That's a good one.
Everybody's going to shy away from that.
I want somebody to say just in a word, yes.
So we at New Jersey Audubon have worked on this issue pretty intensively. I'm not our resident expert. He's not here today. But I can tell you that we have concerns about wind turbines when they're located in nearshore waters. And so we've worked really hard to push them off further out into the ocean. A lot of the birds that migrate closer to shore, so hence the desire to get them out into the further off the coast. All of these decisions that we're making as people and society have an impact. I think the question before us is, what's the least amount of impact that we can have? Renewable energy is certainly a fantastic way to get us into a better place than some of the classic energy sources that we've had. Wind turbines are a good source of renewable energy, but we've got to find the right places to put them, and that's true for solar as well.
I will just... Oh, go ahead. I was just going to, real quick one-liner that Paul Kerlinger has always said, all energy use kills birds. So just pick your coal, pick your whatever, but it all is killing birds. So it is just trying to be better informed.
Yeah, what Paul has said is it's all a matter of how many you kill. So,
there you go.
So I mean, it's a little cynical, but I think to John's point, properly sited wind further offshore is known to kill far fewer birds and destroy far less habitat than coal. So Emil, please.
Yeah, it's all in location, and that goes for solar too. I mean, there's solar siting criteria being developed right now, and do we put solar on? I mean, right now you can't build a warehouse. You've seen warehouses going all up New Jersey for all the mail order stuff. They're covering thousands of acres, and yet none of them are being built to be able to have solar on top because it's more expensive to build them that way. And also the leasing and the legal stuff about, you know, multiple use and who owns it and all that. It's crazy. We're not solving that problem. But can you imagine? I mean, we're covering farm fields with solar, and they could be pollinator meadows. We are chopping down forests, you know, to cover with solar panels, like at Great Adventure. And we had to have a lawsuit to save 42 acres of forest and at least make the solar field at Great Adventure only half as big. So, you know, we're losing habitat. Some of it's habitat loss, then it's, you know, power lines are killing birds. I've seen 5 Philadelphia Viros in my life, and 2 of them were 20 years apart, dead under the power line at Farrington Lake in Middlesex County. So, you know, if 40% of the Philadelphia Vireos that I've ever seen were dead under power lines, imagine how many get killed.
Does anyone else want to jump in on the offshore wind before we go to the next question? No? Okay. I'm going to go left side over here. Deb Shaw. I'm picking, I know her name, so I'm starting here, but we're going to take turns.
Thanks, Eric. One of the biggest killers of birds are cats outdoors. It's a highly controversial and emotional issue that you know, is going to really be hard to come to grips with. And what are your thoughts on ideas for how we can reduce that?
I think what we need to know in that regard, that's a place where it would be nice to know, because we've had 2 different issues here. Keeping common birds common, right? Cats kill a lot of common birds in people's backyards, like doves and white-throated sparrows and, you know, whatever it might be, robins. I mean, how often does a cat kill a Kentucky warbler in New Jersey? You know, now and then probably, but so that's one question is, if we're trying to keep common birds common, then cats are probably a more important issue. On the other hand, we've also talked about trying to save the last habitats and individuals of rare species, which is completely different than keeping common birds common. And, you know, it's hard to know. Where do you put your dollars? Where do you put your effort? We're talking about 2 different things. We're not talking about so much today about endangered species as we are talking about keeping common birds common, it seems. I did a calculation that 3 billion birds comes out to 1 bird for every 1.6 acres of land in North America, in United States and Canada. So all of the United States and Canada, if you take away 1 bird on every 1.6 acres, which is 4 times as big as this room, that's 3 billion birds. But there's a lot of birds increasing, so that means you're taking away more birds than 1 bird per every 4 times as big as this room, because other birds are taking their place, some of the birds that are increasing. And, you know, those are the things that we don't know how to balance our efforts. What are we losing? What are we gaining? Where do we put our efforts? It's a hard question.
I do think this seems to be it's something you can control, right? The keeping your cat inside, and I think all the reason it's not necessarily also that we hate that you have to hate cats or that they cannot have a good life inside. So to me, it still seems like. Although I have to admit that when I was young, we also had an outdoor cat, but. It is something we can control, especially, and that's about a little less than half of the cat problem. The other half is actually stray cats, where there's a huge number of them, and of course that's more difficult to control.
Strikes me that maybe we all need to just think about how we communicate with each other a whole lot more, right? I mean, we're having this challenge in our country of communicating with each other on whatever the issue might be, and cats is a good example of this. I love wildlife. I love animals. That's why I got into the business that I'm now in, and it's a business. We do the business of conservation. That doesn't mean that I don't love cats. It just means that I understand that cats have an impact on wildlife, and cats should be inside.
But when we get into a conversation with someone that loves cats and loves TNR programs versus a conservationist that loves wildlife, cats, domestic animals.
John, what is TNR?
So trap, neuter, release. Thank you, Eric. Where the cats are trapped, they're neutered, and then they're released back into the wild, and so they still continue to have the impact on wildlife populations in the way that they do. I just wonder about our ability to pivot the conversation and focus on the things that we share with those that are so passionate about cats and the trap, neuter, release programs and the approaches to cat colonies. If we start from a place of the things that we share in common, maybe that helps. I know that's a very Pollyannish suggestion because we really do go at loggerheads with each other on a lot of issues, but we've got to work a whole lot harder as a society to listen to what our neighbors and the folks that we bump into on the street are saying. We may not always like it, but give them a chance to get it out, and then we can have some more dialogue about it. I don't see how we're going to make progress on these issues until we really kind of, get on this nugget of how do we communicate with each other, for what that's worth.
Great. And so Deb, is someone that worked for 5 years trying to oppose municipal programs were supporting outdoor cats, it came down to this. If you talk to me about my son or daughter and I think you're criticizing me or them, I am not going to listen to you. But when I started to approach cat owners about this is really about their cat's safety and they're healthier and safer inside, then to John's point, and it took me way too long to realize that. So it's meeting people where they are. You're showing that you value these, as Adrian said, that cats are beautiful. It's not safe for the cats. We have 2 feral kittens that we adopted. They live charmed lives inside. We're 30 feet from a busy road at times, and they wouldn't be alive today if they were outdoor cats. So I don't know, for what it's worth, after banging my head against a brick wall, the light went on that I was really valuing, as John said, people that are passionate about cats and speaking to them from their values. So next question. Okay, gentlemen, if we could take the microphone up the aisle and to the left.
Good workout. Over here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a fairly nice piece of property. It's 6 acres, and I've been trying to leave some of it wild and that kind of thing. But I feel like I wish I had people or a resource who could tell me the best way to manage that piece of property for birds and the insects and everything else that lives on it. And I'm just wondering if there is a way or if there is a source for that kind of education where people can come out and tell me the best way to manage my property for those reasons. Because as I'm listening to you, you're saying we can't control the big industrial farmers. We can't control urban sprawl. And it's up to us as individuals to do the best we can. I'd like to do the best I can. So if there's some resource or a resource can be established to help people like myself, whether you have a large piece of property or a small one, on the best things to do on that piece of property.
All right, so we're going to begin with John. John and his team do just this professionally, and I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources online that, that can be hard to enter into sometimes. I was dead serious about buying Doug Tallamy's newest book, Nature's Best Hope. In the last chapter, there's 10 really specific and clear recommendations on things that you can do, trees that you can plant in your yard, shrubs that you can plant. Visit the New Jersey Audubon website and look for Gardening for Wildlife. We have a staff member that's specifically focused on gardening for wildlife and helping landowners think about, with properties just like yours, how to change it up, how to reduce the lawn, how to get rid of the invasives, and how to plant more plants that are native and hosting caterpillars and all of that. And then you could move on to certify your community. So I'd be happy to chat with you afterwards. We could exchange contact information. That's true for everybody in here. And we'll try to pair you up.
we are limited in our capacity, so I'll say that as well. You know, we're trying to get out there and touch everybody, and Emil's organization, NJCF, the Conservation Foundation, is doing that as well. We got lots of organizations in the state doing that. There's some focused around the Barnegat Bay that are really into this kind of changing up your small spaces and making them better for wildlife and water quality. So, you know, we can try to plug you in with other groups as well. It's a challenge. There's a lot of folks out there that I think have a deep interest in doing this, but just don't know where to get started. So we can do some matchmaking and try to help you in that regard as well.
So Emil, I'm going to go to you next on this.
One thing that's very important, whoever you speak to, they have to know your exact location, the soils, and that sort of thing, because it's all, you know, what you plant is going to be very specific to whether or not your neighborhood has been scraped of all its topsoil before the houses were built, or whether or not you're on the coastal plain in the sand, or whether or not you're on, you know, basalt on the Watchung Ridge or whatever. It's all very pertinent. But a bigger issue is once you do it, you're going to get a lot of, well, it depends on your neighbors, but some of your neighbors are going to like it and some of your neighbors are going to hate it. And the town health inspector is going to claim that you have weeds growing and that you are posing a risk. And there are court cases in New Jersey that have been won by homeowners against their neighbors. I was testified in one of them in Branchburg Township, thanks. and a homeowner was successful in beating back the town in terms of, you know, the town claiming he had noxious weeds all over his property, and he had nothing of the sort. So that's slowly working its way. In my own yard, you know, looks like a jungle. I kept every receipt of every seed, plant, everything that I ever bought, so that when the town person came by and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Here's all my receipts. This is my garden. Here's all the things I paid for, and I'm not changing a thing. And if you want to take me to court, I'll see you in court." And he left. So, but of course, you know, not everybody's as demonstrative as me. But nevertheless, you know, but there are a number of people who have been successful in beating back the public health inspector or the person from the town who thinks that everything's a weed.
So Virginia,
it's
you
really
do a
important.
lot of land management.
There is a program, and I think it's called Jersey Friendly Yards.
Yes, it is.
If I'm not mistaken, I couldn't Google it. That's, I think, kind of becoming the central point to access information and to try to dig a little deeper. So that would be really helpful. And I also have been, I'd like to say I've been littering the world with native plants since 1997. And I've always had native plants in my garden, and I don't ascribe to the jungle hypothesis of gardening. I do like it to look like a garden, and I do think that if you happen to be in a situation or in a neighborhood that they might care a little bit more than another, everyone's neighbors are different, that my sort of keeping it tidy on the edges but let the craziness go in the middle, it kind of is fine. The other piece of it, because I live on a 60 by 100 foot postage stamp, the other thing about neighbors is invite them into your yard. You know, we talked about, you know, talking to the cat people about, I love cats too, and they're adorable, but I don't want them in the yard. So invite them and share it and join them to come take a look. Tell them to let their kids come play in your yard and look at the butterflies and watch the chrysalis change. So that's how I would try to dig a little into the angry neighbor scenario.
I give all my neighbors bouquets of native wildflowers, and I've won them all over except the one lady who insists that everything should be covered in plastic slipcovers. So.
Other panelists want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'll just say one real quick thing is that there's also, I've seen an increase in landscapers, professionals who are, you know, advertising, we do native, right? So I have a little piece of property down in Navillis, and that's what we did. We hired somebody that did specifically for wildlife gardening for us, and that's what they did. It was all native. And echoing what Virginia said earlier, you know, Pat and Clay Sutton, Pat Sutton's website and everything is awesome too. So if you want to check that out, I would.
There are lots of resources out there to use, absolutely. There's lots and lots of resources out there. Hiring a professional would be fine as well, absolutely. They know what they're doing, or at least they have some sort of idea. But if you're going to try and do it yourself, please use or look at multiple sources of information and data to make sure that you are sure. And if you're really not sure, talk to somebody in the field, and they may be able to give you a better idea. So make sure to check multiple sources before planting a seed in your yard if you're not sure if it's native. There's a lot of varieties of plants out there, and the varieties might be helpful, but they might not have exactly all of the same qualities as a native. So you want to be careful, because that all comes down to the genetics behind it, and it could be very, very variable.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. When I give tours of my yard, I always tell people that it's native-ish, because don't get hung up on native. There might be some great plants that are native enough, but they're a variety of a purple coneflower. It's okay. We don't want to trap ourselves and, sacrifice doing some good things. So just be aware of that. So try not to get bogged down in it, but the resources will guide you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And it also sounds like we're talking about two different things here, right? We're talking about native plants, and we're talking about natural landscapes, which could be different, right? So your natural landscape might bug the heck out of your neighbors, right? But your native plantings could be like yours, right? Looking really nice, but still attracting that wildlife. So I think you have to decide what you want to do. Do you want to have the jungle?
All right. And another thing you can do is be an evangelist for this, non-denominational, but putting on our kind of bird conservation, pollinator, and habitat hats. Go to the National Wildlife Federation's backyard habitat certification. Get that sign. It's really attractive. I can't tell you how many conversations I've heard where your neighbor will just be like, wow, where'd you get that sign? It's a great way to then invite them into your yard and have that conversation. So National Wildlife Federation has a backyard habitat certification. They also do it for places of worship, places of business, as well as schoolyards. So the good news is someone might say that and be like, what's going on? What's Virginia doing in her yard? And then she's got this sign out front that says, this has been certified for a backyard habitat. Imagine whatever faith you may have, if your places of worship has that. What a great way to have a conversation with your congregation and celebrate. So be that ambassador. So the next question, we're going to go to this side. We are going to go left and up 2/3, and you get to pick whoever you want, because I can't point to a person. So keep on going up, and then you pick who you want.
Thank you. I'm Debbie Summers, and I'm an alumni of Stockton, and that's where I started my nature education, became a naturalist, and then I couldn't get a job. I wanted to be a naturalist, and I went back to school and got my teacher certification. And I came full circle, and I started Mr. B's backyard classroom in Galloway Township, Virginia. We've had representatives. We started a nature fest. And back to what Linda was saying, I would get my students out there, 7th graders, for like 40 minutes at a time in the class periods, because we had periods. And there's birds. It's retention and a detention basin. It's full of wildlife. And in this little spot, there is proof, if you look at the kids' blogs, that if you expose them to nature and get them to appreciate the little things, we did birding in there. We had red-winged blackbirds. And one of the funny little stories to that was I did cleanups in there with the kids too. So we'd take things out and talk about how its effects. And one of the girls, we were doing a cleanup, and mallard ducks got up and flew from one pond to the other, and she looked at me, and she was a bright girl, said, I didn't know ducks could fly. And I said, that's because you're seeing those lazy ducks at Smithville, for those of you locals, where they get fed by hand. But there was that moment of and I said, that's why I do Mr. B's backyard classroom. So they got to learn simple things. So I just retired, and I'm going to throw out a matchmaking question, that I know how to start an outdoor classroom for schools. and how to be an environmental educator. And I think bringing that to kids is key because they're going to remember that. And I even did simple things like just listen, and we had a saying, move much, see little, move little, see much. And we had benches in there. It was just sit and listen. And you'll see blogs where they appreciated nature. So, and I would tell them, get up from your phone, stop looking. We took out things just for pictures. But that exposure is a seed that needs to be planted, and it's key. And I think it can be done for schools, like with retention, detention basins. What do you have? It's right here. What can you walk to? What can you do? So I'm going to throw out matchmaking questions. If you know how, I can do that in my retirement to help environmental education. That's my next passion that I'm going to pass on to kids. So it's key.
So before I open this up, Dale Roslet, just stand up. I mentioned you before. So Dale, New Jersey Audubon has over 1,000 volunteers working on environmental education, and we work in over 500 schools in the state. So you asked the matchmaking question. That's why I asked Dale to stand up. So she would be a great resource for you after this. But I will open this up to the panel for the matchmaking question about kind of someone who's passionate about working with schools and others in retirement.
I just want to make a comment about my wife Hazel does all sorts of environmental education, and I've helped her on occasion, and especially in urban and suburban areas up north. And you get a bunch of kids and they have no connection with the natural world at all, and they're teenagers, and you know what's on teenagers' minds. And so she has a lot of luck getting kids to start paying attention by, with the plants, first talking about sex and plants. And then after she starts talking about sex and plants, she can move on to courtship behavior in birds, and then the kids tend to get hooked because it's something they're interested in. So I would suggest that a major way to get kids interested in nature is to, especially teenagers, is to start right in with the sex.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, I have to definitely reference the Friends of Forsyth. They run the environmental education program at Forsyth Refuge. So certainly if you want to volunteer and get engaged, you need to contact them.
All right, so really good point. Dale just did a podcast on this. So if you go to newjerseyaudubon.org/coffee, she just did a deeper dive into some of the kind of science and approaches to getting kids outside. So that may be another place to get additional thoughts and how to engage. So we're going to go, yeah?
I think that if you notice the trend that's happening, every single one of these questions relates back to engagement and how it aids everything that's going on. From just getting the young people involved to the cats, because there's so many groups out there that, can be part of our little movement. And I put beneath every single one of my emails, act local, think global. And I think that's something that we can all do, and that ties together all of this.
Good, great point. So we're going to keep your workout going, and we're going to move to this side of the room. Oh, jeez. I feel like the moral hazard game. You get to pick, just go up and pick someone.
We're going up top. Don't have to go to the gym later.
So we are doing the birder cardio workout here today. All right.
Hi, everybody. So I know that snakes and other mammals in New Jersey, there's issues with genetic variation in populations because the corridors aren't there like they used to be. So a lot of these populations are staying in one place, and they're potentially susceptible to disease because there's less genetic variation, right? So relating, I think everyone's thinking about diseases a little bit more now too, but related to birds and climate change, some of these birds that may not be migrating anymore, are you seeing any concerns with what that means for the health of those local population in terms of genetic variation or just potential health threats to those birds that might choose not to migrate because it's warmer?
All right, let's start with Adrian Doctor, kind of the global level. I'm not trying to throw you in front of the bus, but I'm thinking maybe we can start with you and then open it up.
Yeah, so it can be a concern. Yeah, that especially happens when populations get very, very small. They start to sort of get, because the population gets so small, they start to inbreed, and that really can reduce their fitness, and they can get diseases. It does happen in very, very small populations, and one thing that's natural about birds is actually that they move so much and that they spread a lot. So in that sense, I think that inbreeding problem really, that is really becomes a problem for when you're really, really close to extinction already of a species. And then, so it's a regime where you really, really want to stay away from. But that's not said. Like once birds get to a critical stage, like the spoon-billed sandpiper, for example, yeah, those things can really become a concern. Luckily, and it's amazing, like if you look at the North American alpha fauna, all the warblers, I mean, they're all still there and in pretty good numbers. And again, that's something I keep my hopes up, that despite everything that happens, there's so little true extinctions that have happened in North America. So let's hope it stays like that.
So we haven't lost too many birds from the state of New Jersey in recent times. A couple that come to mind are loggerhead shrike. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Loggerhead shrike. Maybe sedge wren. There might be a couple of spots. Black rail is really in trouble. But they're mostly migratory species. It's more or less that the habitats are unoccupied for whatever reason. So I don't think we're suffering from. And then we have some other birds like golden wing warbler that have very interesting problems between the hybridization and climate change and loss of habitat. But I mean, for the most part, we're not dealing with the kind of situation that we are with, say, bog turtle or tiger salamander or some of these highly restricted habitat species. And the species that have been lost in New Jersey are not due to those kind of inbreeding problems. They're just from range contraction and that sort of thing. So that I don't think it's not the problem in birds that it is in some of the other species.
It may not be the driving problem overall. I mean, it just, as you talk, Emil, it makes me think about northern bobwhite quail and ruffed grouse, and we have a whole suite of forest birds that are struggling because the habitat's not available for them that they rely on.
It's unoccupied. Yeah.
Most of these species, we're losing them before we even get to really fully answer the question of was it genetic inbreeding and bottlenecks in their reproduction and all that stuff that's causing their collapse. They're collapsing long before that because they just don't have the available habitat that supports the fundamentals of their existence. Not that we shouldn't be paying attention to those things. The New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife just released a really great spatial data product on habitat connectivity that helps us think about road crossings and where salamanders in particular or turtles are getting hit by vehicles, and how do we create culverts and safe ways for them to move across some of these spaces. And so that's something the state and a lot of conservation partners are working on. But that goes back to just making sure the habitat is there to sustain them and it's functioning in the right ways.
Just as an aside, on a county highway in the Pine Barrens, I've been radio tracking pine snakes now for about 15 years on both sides of a county highway, and I've radio tracked probably about 50 adult pine snakes, and not one of them has ever crossed the highway. So they're all the ones that attempt to cross the highway are getting killed as juveniles. So the county highway might as well be the Pacific Ocean in terms of the breeding of those two subpopulations of snakes. Now, obviously, it's not the same in birds because it's easy for them to get across something. But the potential's there. I mean, if the turnpike becomes 25 lanes someday, that's going to stop a lot of critters from getting from North to South Jersey.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Don't make me choose.
All right, we left aisle, half the way up on the right. Woman, green shirt, wearing glasses.
Grand prize.
I apologize for bringing up the cat topic again, but my question applies to more than just the cat topic. You guys talked a lot about attracting birds to your yard, putting up a hummingbird feeder, planting natives, reducing the lawn, certifying your habitat through national wildlife. And all of that's very difficult to do if you are forced to live next door to a municipally mandated so-called managed cat colony. So common ground is great, you know, because I love cats. That's, you know, I have cats. I've rescued cats. But, you know, this has to be a priority. And common ground, unfortunately, is not going to address the unowned cat population. So my question is, given that we have right now in the New Jersey State Legislature laws that are going to mandate TNR throughout the state and keep cats on the landscape, how do you propose getting birders, environmentalists, and just landowners, anybody and everybody, involved in policy changes at the municipal level, at the county level, and at the state level? Because, of course, this isn't the only contentious topic. This could be for the wind turbines. This could be for pesticides. I mean, all kinds of things. I mean, there's things that sound good on the surface, but how do you get people involved in policy changes? Thank you.
Just the easy questions, right? You know, there's not a silver bullet for a lot of these questions, obviously. I think there's stepwise exercises that we need to take to get to where we want to go. We have a really robust team that works in Trenton on public policy issues, works with state government to, you know, advocate for good bills to be passed and advocate that bad bills not be passed. So we watch some of these things that you're speaking of. One of the things that we do is we try to bring people with us when we go to the State House to testify on bills, and we've done this a number of times. Bring landowners in that can speak to issues, you know, relevant to the bill that's up for consideration, and we'll continue to do that. I think the onus is on all of us to get involved in politics. This is, you know, we got to get involved. We've got to get engaged. You got to go to your township's meetings on occasions when the topics are, you know, of interest and relevance to the things that we care about. You got to speak up. The politicians are going to respond to the people that they hear from, and if they don't hear from us, they're not going to respond to the issues that we care about. And there's a lot of ways to get engaged. There's a lot of tools out there now that's, you know, even just in the last couple of years that have popped up in terms of different ways to get active and get engaged. So I would just, you know, be an advocate for that, whether that's your school board, your township, your county, state government. You know, there's opportunities on all of those fronts to be a good public citizen and participate in the political process.
So, nobody likes a battle better than me, and yet, I must admit, that's one battle that I'm not going to get involved in, is the cat battle. I got involved in the deer battle 30 years ago, right? I had my car vandalized. We, you know, at great expense to me, at emotional expense, time, energy, we brought the deer herd in the Watchung Reservation down from 300 per square mile down to about 15. It's been that way for about 15 years now. The criticism has never abated, but worm-eating warblers are back in the Watchung Reservation, right? There's a shrub layer of native plants. So, and yet I'm still not fighting that battle as hard as I used to because it's too much. You know, now a gentleman earlier said, and this is really important, he said, you know, we wants to do things in our yards, we want to act locally, and one of the gentlemen said, we're not going to stop sprawl, we're not going to get rid of chemicals. I don't believe that, right? Neonicotinoids have been banned in most countries in Europe. I mean, you could probably verify that. You know, Roundup Ready crops are being banned in many places. These are giant issues. There's no issue that you should ever say is too small to fight. Now, the reason that I'm not fighting the cat battle is because I fought the deer battle for 25 years and I just can't do it anymore. And I think I'm allowed to say that. If you can't accept that, I'm sorry. But I fight lots of other battles. So pick your battle. If you want to fight the cat battle, that's great. Please do it. It's a big issue, but we got to fight a lot of big issues. We got to fight a lot of big issues, and especially chemicals and sprawl and, regional planning so that we can have more places like the Pinelands where we protect uplands. So there's a ton of battles to fight. And everybody should pick the one that they're best at.
Yeah.
Linda?
Yeah, I'm singing the same old song. I think getting involved in clubs and, like Audubon and your local bird club, this is where these issues come up. If we're sitting alone at home, we're not going to hear about these issues, and we're not going to know about how to be involved. At the DVOC, we have a conservation committee, and there's a report at every meeting about the new bills that are coming up and what we can do to take action as a club. And we're 375 members strong, which is a lot better than just me learning about it on my own. I'm one voice. Now I've got 374 other people that potentially feel the same way, because we're all part of the same club and we can take that same action. So I highly recommend that, you get involved in a club like that'll tell you about these issues. And the other point is that, we're all here, like you're all here, which is great. You can all start singing now because you're the choir and we're the preachers, right? But what do we do to engage people who don't know about where are we getting the people that are in row houses in North Philly to care about the cat population or care about the wind turbines or whatever? And that is back to that old, human to human contact and engagement. And if we all go out birding and we all have binoculars on, like I walk my dog every single day with binoculars, and I never look through them. I don't have to. I know every single bird, on the trail. But those binoculars are an engagement point for other people with dogs in that park. And I start to talk to them, and next thing you know, I can't walk the dog alone anymore because every single jogger in the park is like, hey, I just saw a bird. Okay, great. Right, but guess what? They're probably, if I broach the subject with them about a specific issue, they're probably more interested in taking action then.
Great. So there's some easy access points for this. At a state level, the two organizations that do the most advocacy and lobbying for conservation are New Jersey Audubon, New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Sign up. I wrote my senator in less than 45 seconds in support of the plastic ban bill. So our organizations provide information, but they also allow for people to plug in. If you're interested in getting local at a municipal level, a really good organization is the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions, also known as ANJEC, ANJEC.org. So there's some really good places. And if you are interested in the partisan portion, which we're not here to talk about, there are groups like New Jersey League of Conservation Voters that get involved with that aspect. So we are going to wrap it up. That was a strong question to end on, and I think let's give the audience, yourselves, a big round of applause and the panelists. All right, so I got my shout out list. Our host, Stockton University. Go Stockton! The event sponsors, Friends of Forsyth, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and New Jersey Audubon, and the wonderful team of volunteers here from Stockton today. So thank you. So hopefully we're leaving today. Conservation will only work if we have a strong foundation from science. Science doesn't necessarily lead to the good outcomes, but if we have policy that isn't based on science, it will be an unguided missile. So thank you so much for coming all the way down from Ithaca to give us this incredible overview. So my best friend, Bill, who lives down the street, hasn't come across a piece of grim news that he doesn't feel verifies his worldview that we're all doomed, right? But what we heard today is a message of hope. We are not bemoaning the inevitable fate of the decline of birds. This is a rallying cry for action. What can we do individually? What must we do collectively to see birds recover in North America and their habitats?
So that's what gives me hope, what gives me optimism. When you hear from the panelists and all the ideas that were offered, hopefully you're bringing a piece of this with you. You're bringing a piece of Emil and Virginia and Linda and her dog with you for what you can do to make that difference. You are, in essence, the ambassadors. Linda hit the nail on the head. Become that ambassador. When you're talking about your dog walking in the park, Virginia, talk about inviting your neighbors in to enjoy this. John, when you talked about working with landowners on their own property. Emil, when you talked about working at a county park. We're talking about working at Ocean County Park, for example. Think of yourself as an ambassador. You are the brand ambassador for birds, right? Because we are the bird's voice. Take that home and challenge ourselves to think about a big tent. So, for example, our audience here is overwhelmingly Caucasian, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I have no shame about where my ancestors came from. We see a lot of women and men here, so there's gender diversity, but we need to make this tent a little bit bigger. We need to welcome people of all incomes, all ethnicities, all languages, all backgrounds to this tent in order for us to succeed. So part of this is we're going to have to get ourselves a little bit uncomfortable. I grew up in a suburb down the road, Linwood. I live in the caretaker's cottage in Bernardsville. I like going to a city for a day, but I don't know what it's like to grow up in a city, right? So I need to get out of my comfort zone a little bit and challenge myself to be that better person and to meet people where they are. I think as you've heard, there's many, John touched upon communications. There are many people that are trying to break us down as a country, my own view, in how we communicate to one another. But what we heard from Adrian Doctor is this birds and habitat bind us. We are bigger than this, and we are better than this as a country. So let's be that better self in how we approach bird conservation. So think about some of the places to start. First and foremost, you heard all the panelists have fun. So the first thing you should do after this very inspirational and extended time inside is get outside and have fun. And as John said, maybe bring someone with you, right? Because our passion begins with fun. It was me playing at Forsyth in college that committed me to this life choice.
Bring somebody that nobody else is going to bring.
Right. Bring a new person out.
Yeah.
Okay, so the spring is right around the corner. Plant some native species for wildlife. If you live in an apartment, put in a common milkweed in just a potted plant on that patio. You can make that difference. Volunteer for one of New Jersey's great conservation groups, refuges, or parks. Get involved in your town's open space and environmental committees. Call your elected officials early and often. I can't tell you how much they appreciate hearing from people. We often think, well, we can't affect what's going on in Trenton or DC, and you know what? We can. So pick up that phone and get to know your elected officials. Keep your cats inside, and take random acts of kindness to reduce your carbon footprint. So I hope you leave with the same hope, excitement, enthusiasm, and determination that all of our panelists have here today. We encourage everyone to continue the great conversation as we depart here. Again, a reminder from Sue to me that there's lots of information. So there's good resources right outside this room that you can take with you to help you in this journey. Thanks so much. Now get out there and engage in joyful acts of conservation.